What is up? This is Adam with the Cloud Automation Blog with a quick video on a really simple way and very useful way to log both debug and information within vRealize Orchestration. So whether it's people that I come across daily, people that I either work with internally or externally, or if I actually download IP that people have created online. And logging is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. There's really no set constructs around, hey, I need to log this way, or we should log this way, or the standard, such as like camel case or indenting within YAML or JSON. So it's kind of this forgotten thing, but there's this really simple, easy way to log. And here's a really simple example. So what we're going to do is we're looking at vRealize Orchestration. I just created a little workflow here. Actually copied another workflow, this get weather and do something. So we're going to edit this workflow. And in general, we can see I created a log output attribute, and it's a Boolean, so it's set to no. The only values are yes or no. So it's pretty much true or false, obviously true being yes, false being no. And then if we go over to the schema, the scriptable tasks, I'm going to do a quick debug. Out of the box, this should output quite a bit of information. So I must have this set to no, so it's not logging the data. I want to set this to yes to actually log the data. So if I go back to schema, you can see here this one's a little limited. But if I do a debug here, and I do another submit, you can see there's a bunch of information here. So the key here is what I'm doing is I'm debugging my workflow. In a production environment, I really don't need all this debug information. In a much larger workflow, if you have 15 or 20 or 30 workflows all linked together in a master workflow, this could get really messy and really confusing. But with that said, even though it could be confusing, this is very useful if you're trying to debug the workflow. So how do you actually turn this on or off very simply in a much larger workflow where it may contain 10 or 15 workflows itself? So what you can do is create that attribute, the Boolean attribute, go over to your schema, and let's look at some of the scriptable tasks. So we actually want to pass in that log output. So you just click the little button there and log output. So you want to click that, click select. It's actually going to do it twice because I already have it imported, so you can see it there. We're going to go over to scripting. So the old script did not have this little if statement. All you do here is if log output equals true, then let's log these things. And down here, if log output equals true, we're going to log these things. So you can see status code, response, and content and string, status code, the response, and then the content is string. Sometimes I'll get the reply from some of my colleagues or people that I talk to, well, what if something here broke, or what if something here broke? One of the really cool things about debugging in the system.log function within vRealize Orchestrator is I can literally put this here and then one below, and if I do status code 1 and status code 2, it will output, it's more, VRO runs in a top to bottom, so it'll run top to bottom. Unless you have functions, that's a little bit different, but in this case, there are no functions. It's pretty straightforward. So in this case, it's going to run top to bottom. It's going to run status code 1. If this actually failed, if it more or less crashed on this response, it wouldn't run status code 2, and that would tell you right there that, hey, it failed on this because it said status code 1, and the next thing that it ran was this command. So that's just for debugging this simple workflow. Again, the real point of vRealize Orchestration is how do we string together 5 or 10 or 15 different workflows? This really point-in-time data doesn't provide a ton of value in the bigger picture when you have, as I said, 10 or 15 workflows that you're all stringing together. So if you're actually debugging a workflow real-time, this style is very useful. In the bigger picture of things, this may not be all that useful. If you do have something like that, then let's say you did want just the status code. You want to make sure that you got that 200 status code. You could do something like that. So. And again, if you were that specific, again, in the bigger picture of workflows, you may want to put something like activity name status code. So instead of actually activity name, maybe you do active directory AD user add status code, or IPAM, or calendar, or let's say weather API status code. Because what this is going to do when you run that much larger 15 or 20 workflow, you'll see like, weather API status code was 200, calendar update status code was 200, email sent status code was, it's like a 300 or a 400. It was a redirector. It failed. That would provide useful information in the bigger workflow, but maybe you don't want all of this data. So moving on, let's move on to the next pieces. Scriptable tasks. Let's do the same thing here. Let's go over to in. Let's add that log output Boolean value as an input. Go over to scripting. And if we jump back, you can see, let me just actually get out of this guy. You can see right here, just at 64.02. That's useful in the point and case debugging process. That is very useful because I know that it's properly pulling that data from the JSON string that I'm now parsing, and then I'm outputting that my temp. So you can see right here, system.log my temp. But in that big picture, it really doesn't matter. So what we're going to want to do here is pretty simple. Let me just go back to the scriptable task. Let me copy this guy, Control C, close out of this, go back to this scriptable task. Let me just add that line and then add a little squiggly bracket there to close that. But this one, that is important. So we're going to leave that one outside of that. And close. And what we can do now is we're going to do a debug and see what this comes up with. So it should look very similar because I have it where it is logging the output. So you can see here now it's actually the weather API status code is 200 as we requested. But if I go back to general and I do the log output and I select that to no, so we actually don't want to log that information. Let me go back to schema. Let me do another debug here. And it should look a lot cleaner. Look at that. So the status code, which is important because I know it succeeded. Then the current temp is 63.64 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it might be a cool evening, bring a coat. So it looks a lot cleaner. If you were to run 15 or 20 different workflows, they're all outputting even just these 3 lines. You know, you're going to have 45 lines based on 15 different workflows if they each had 3 lines of output. Now imagine that against the other, like I think it was around 15, 16 lines each. I mean, obviously that can get pretty hairy, and now you're going to have to spend time actually trying to figure out where something went wrong or why it went wrong. Now, you heard me talking big picture. How do I actually make this work in that big picture, in that 15 or 20 workflow process? So an attribute is a local attribute. I can't actually use this in other places. I could pass this on, but in this case, this will just be a smaller workflow that'll be used in a much larger workflow. So we're going to want to move this out of an attribute and actually into an input. So I can add that input, and let me actually delete this first. So let me go to log output. Let me delete that. I'm going to go to input, log output, click OK. And we're going to want to change this to a Boolean. So type BOOL, double click that. If I go to schema, I'm just going to want to change these. You're going to have to update all of these so you can see the log output is not set. So just run through. It'd be a good habit to actually do this, create it as an input rather than a attribute to start. Because what will happen is when you use this in the bigger picture workflow, it'll ask to actually assign this to all your other ones. So you'll get in the habit of using this. If I do a debug now, it'll actually prompt me to a yes or no plus the zip code. I do not want to log the output, so it should look very similar with just 3 lines. If I go back to debug and I do a yes, it should do those 10 to 15 lines. There we go. Perfect. I hope that helped. Like it, subscribe. Thank you. Have a great day.